Hello, everyone. It's great to be with you today to talk about finding and using alien registrations for 20th century U.S. immigrants. It's a personally relevant topic for me in researching my own family, and I got really excited about this topic this year because these records have recently become much more accessible. They were transferred from a federal agency over to the National Archives, and that is to our benefit, as you will see going through the presentation. Here's our session goals for today. We're going to talk about the Alien Registration Act of 1940 and the records it created, empower you with the knowledge and some beginning skills for searching for your family members or other individuals in the main alien registrations record set. And we'll look at a few cases where alien registration is a relevant source for genealogical information. You'll get a taste of how rich these forms can be as well. I want to start by introducing you to one of my great-grandfathers. This is Johann Robert Gidland, who lived from 1906 to 1952. He was born in Sweden, came through Ellis Island in 1922, married twice in Brooklyn, and died there in 1952, but in between had crisscrossed the seas of the world as a seaman and a merchant mariner. He appears a lot on lists of alien crew members. He made 3 declarations of intention to become a U.S. citizen in various places, but he never became a fully naturalized citizen. Up until the year of his death, he was listed on crew lists as a Swedish national. So because of those things I highlighted in blue, Johann Robert Gidland is an ideal candidate for alien registration research. We're hoping to find this guy in this record set. So let's jump into that first session goal. We're going to talk about the Alien Registration Act of 1940, which is also called the Smith Act. You don't have to worry so much about the legal citation. It's very Googleable. It helps to frame that legislation by taking a quick glance at the history of the Immigration and Naturalization Service, or the INS. This was the federal agency responsible for naturalization. From 1933 to 2002, it was first part of the Department of Labor, and it combined 2 things that were previously separate. Immigration was under Department of Commerce, naturalization was under Department of Labor up until 1933. In 1940, the INS was moved to the Department of Justice the same year they started doing alien registrations. So keeping track of alien residents is kind of the main theme of this record set. And if we think to before 1940, of when were the times when non-citizens were interacting with the federal government, it was once when they came to the country, they were listed on a passenger arrival. And then if they became a citizen, then they would file naturalization papers, which was a 2-part process. As I alluded to earlier, they filed that declaration first, and then after a waiting period could become a full citizen. Looking a little further back, before 1906, naturalization was very decentralized. Non-citizens could go to any court of record. After 1906, that began to be a centralization or a centralized process focused on certain courts, and the federal government was doing record keeping. So it gives us some context to see how alien registration was starting to bring all of these things together in a more centralized way. Today, INS has become U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, or USCIS, and that's part of the Department of Homeland Security. So why did they pass the Alien Registration Act? Well, the federal government realized that they had no touch points for non-citizens except for their entry, and they were simply living their lives in our American communities, free to travel, free to work, and the federal government had no idea who they were or where they were. So this legislation required all adult non-citizens to go to their local post office and fill out a 2-page form within 4 months of the passing of the legislation. There was concern over foreign interference during World War II. The US government had just seen Vichy France start collaborating with Nazi Germany, and there was concern that non-citizens in America might be trying to influence politics in a detrimental way. Like it or not, that was the big motivation behind this legislation. On the right, you'll see FDR's statement about the legislation, and they managed to cast it in a very positive way, talking about the protection of the country, but also protecting the what they called loyal aliens at the time, who are its guests. And a lot of those aliens, I mean, were contributing to the economy and their local culture, so they were more integrated than he makes it sound. But it was also cast as a way to protect these non-citizens from suspicion from their neighbors, especially those from countries allied against the Western nations. This was cast as a way for those non-citizens to become trustworthy, that they shouldn't be worried about giving their information to the government. The last piece there is that the act also prohibited speech about overthrowing the American government. So that gives you a flavor of what this legislation was focused on, which was very much protecting the federal government during a possible wartime. So who was subject to registration? All resident non-citizens age 14 and older. 5.6 million of them went to the post office between August 1st, 1940 and March 31st, 1944, and filled out the Form AR2. And some of them would fill out some supplements that all stayed together. That form got sent to Washington, D.C. Remember, this is a centralization effort. The INS issued them an A number, or an alien registration number, and that non-citizen would get a receipt in the mail with that number that then tracked with them the rest of their lives. There are some special categories that we're not so concerned with today. If you get interested in those later, there's information on the National Archives website that I refer to in the handout. What's on the forms? This is where it gets really exciting for us who are interested in family history, because these forms capture basically a menu of opportunities for further research. I'll talk about the highlights in blue here, the non-citizens' intended activities. So we're capturing not just people who have been working here for a long time, but people who are coming for special projects or for academic purposes. They'll be writing those down on these forms. Criminal history, if the non-citizen had ever been indicted, arrested, or convicted of a crime. If you had not yet found a passenger arrival for your individual, they would be listing the date, port, and mode of arrival. They're listing their occupation and their employer, their membership in organizations or clubs. And the government is trying to keep an eye on anything politically oriented in that category. Military service, date and place of citizenship filings, all of those things we can use to find other records about the people we're interested in. The ones in white are certainly important too. They help you correlate the person you find on an alien registration with the individual that you're looking for. So where did these records go? Well, they sat in INS offices for a long time before they were microfilmed to manage space, and an index was created. All those paper copies, most of them were destroyed, and the microfilm is the only thing left. That microfilm was digitized by U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, and those digital files are what was transferred to the National Archives earlier this year. And in case you like the nerdy archivist bits, it's 5 million PDFs on a hard drive that are sitting in College Park, Maryland. Here's a table that I threw together to give you a glimpse of how much of a benefit this is for us for these records to be at the National Archives. USCIS has essentially what's a specialized FOIA program that they call their genealogy program, where they now charge $30 for their staff to look at an index, and then $30 for them to send you any records that they find. It takes them 12 to 15 months to get back to you, and they send you a CD. And as I alluded to, it required an index search to be able to find these alien registrations because there was no other way to find the A number by which they're listed. Now that they're at the National Archives, we have access to archivists for free reference service. They have a $20 minimum fee for these records, but if you do multiple records in one order, it's only $17 per record. They're coming in a matter of weeks, and they send you a download link. And that's all the archival service. We also now have access ourselves, anyone with an internet connection, can look in the digitized database to try to find their people. Okay, so now we've got some context about the legislation and the records that are there. Let's move into how do we get the skills to be able to find these records. What's nice about alien registrations is that most of them happened in 1940, only a few months after the census was taken in April. So the first step we're going to take is to check the 1940 census. On that census, if we look in column 16, it's the citizenship of the foreign born, and we're going to find three different possibilities there. Assuming they were foreign born, they're either going to be naturalized already, in which case we're going to look for a petition for naturalization. Those are court records. And what's special for us today is either PA or AL. PA is first papers, or that first stage of the naturalization where they filed a declaration to become a citizen. And we're going to search for that, but also look for an alien registration because they were not yet naturalized citizens. AL is also a clue to look for an alien registration because they hadn't done anything yet, even though they may have been there, in the States for a long time. Once we've identified individuals of interest who might have filed this record, we're going to search the flexoline database. And that's what we're going to talk about next. Flexoline is that manual index that I referred to earlier that was created by INS to find these alien registrations. It's typed ticker tape. Someone with a typewriter was typing up a bunch of codes. They were cutting those up, alphabetizing them, and gluing them on bigger pieces of paper. They took pictures of those on microfilm, and now that microfilm is digitized. There were three formats on the typed ticker tape that influence the format that the entry in the database is going to take. So not only were they manually typing on these ticker tapes, but then when USCIS digitized this index, they were manually typing what they saw into a computer. So we've got 2 rounds of clerical errors and omissions to think about here. It's a lot of room for human error. After the National Archives received this database from USCIS, they performed some actions on it that make it much more usable for us. All of those codes, and we'll see examples in a second, they converted into meaningful data. They added a couple of fields that help us find people, and they analyzed the database for completion and accuracy. There's lots of technical documentation about all of that. What we're concerned with is how do we find our people? There's a little glimpse of the ticker tape that we were talking about, and we can all breathe a sigh of relief that we don't have to try to figure out what it means. But we do have to access Flexoline on the Access to Archival Databases, or AAD portal, through the National Archives. And while it's an important database for us, it can feel a little dated. It can feel clunky. Hopefully, what we're talking through today will empower you, embolden you even to try your hand at finding someone in the database. Some of you might have already used AAD. There are several other categories of databases on there. The one I've used the most is World War II Army enlistments. So all of the AAD databases support wildcard searches, and this is a really powerful tool for taking advantage of the data that's available because you're going to be able to find names that were misspelled, alternate spellings of names, any name that has a suffix or a prefix that accidentally made it into the database. Maybe there's punctuation that might have been added or omitted, and there are almost certainly illegible characters that were entered as an underscore in the database, and we'll see that come into play later. Searching with wildcards is going to account for all of that so that you can still find what you're looking for. Here's some examples of wildcard searches that I used in looking for one of the individuals I was interested in, just to get you to start brainstorming when you think about your individual's name. How many ways can you split it up that might help you find them in case there was a misspelling? So there's starting with the beginning of the name. There's using a fragment of a name and combining with a place or a date of birth. There's taking out the middle of the name. One of the strategies that the archivists modeled for me was extracting the consonants so that just in case vowels were substituted, we're finding those as well. And the list could go on. It's as hard as you want to work on it. You can come up with lots of variations. So here is my first example of we're going to work through the 1940 census to searching in flexoline and then take a look at the resulting registration. We've got 1940 census from Brockton in Plymouth County, Massachusetts. The household we're looking at is adjutor parental, his wife Antoinette Marie, and their children Guy Joseph or Guy, and their daughter Jacqueline or Jacqueline. Looking all the way to the right, you'll see that pink box highlighting column 16, and we're checking to see are any of them naturalized or have any of them filed papers or are they aliens? So you can see on the first line, adjutor is an alien, Antoinette is alien, Guy has filed papers, and Jacqueline is an alien. So we're going to try to find all four of these people in flexoline and order an alien registration. First thing to try is always just see if you can find their name just as it is. I knew from other research that whoever wrote this census entry made a little spelling error on adjutor, so I put in the J instead of G, and last name Parento. And fortunately for me, there was one result that I found by typing in just his name. The age matches, the state of registration matches, and I was happy with that result. Here's the full database entry that you would, once you click into the result that you're interested in, it's going to show you all the values that are in the database. Some of them we're not too concerned with. We want to verify the name, of course. The A number is the most important, and that because that's the piece of data that we need to order the record. Other helpful pieces can be the birth month, day, and year. You'll notice that this entry only has a birth year because it's in format A. We talked about earlier how those ticker tapes were typed in 3 formats. Format A is only going to have a birth year. Formats B and C are going to have birth month and day. So you've got to account for the fact that you don't know which format your individual is going to be in. If you try searching by a birthday and a birth month and you don't find anyone, you still need to vary your searches to make sure you're finding format A entries. And I highlighted the gender there too, which is unique to format A, that you can narrow it down to males or females. At the very bottom on the right, you'll notice that they include a soundex. And I believe that's all 3 formats, that all of the entries should have a soundex conversion for the last name. And I don't have time to go over too much about soundex today, but I put a link in the handout that can guide you through how that system works. It was essentially an indexing strategy for finding names that sound very similar. So once we have a flexoline entry of interest and we find that A number, we're ready to request the record from the National Archives. We can do it by email. We send them 4 pieces of data about the individual, name, year of birth, country of birth, and the A number we found. And it streamlines their process to let them know your billing address and state that you would like PDFs. Typically, we don't need certified copies unless you're working on dual citizenship is usually why people are getting certified copies from NARA or some other reason. For genealogy research, we can just order the PDFs. They'll get delivered to us electronically. As I mentioned earlier, if you do 2 or more requests up to 10, you'll get a better price on the records. And here's what the National Archives sent back to me for adjutor parento. You can see at the top, it's got the alien registration number stamped. And I highlighted at the bottom the address, which matches the 1940 census, and that confirms that we found the same person. What else was on his form? Well, if I didn't know where he was born, he wrote down the city for me, or someone typed it at the post office. That can be very useful depending on what region your ancestor came from. Maybe you haven't found the city written down anywhere else. The next highlight box is I last arrived in the United States at St. Albans, Vermont, on the Canadian Pacific Railroad with a specific date. If I hadn't found the passenger arrival record yet, I have a very specific place to look now. More of his questions. My employer is Peter Paulos in Stoughton, Massachusetts. So now I know he's working in the next town over, and I have an associate that I can research. And the second box there, his first citizenship papers were received in Brockton, Mass, and it even gives the number of the declaration that I can look for. So just on one form, we've gotten 4 big clues to other records that we could find for this person. But we know that just searching by a simple name isn't always going to work, so we've got to have some more strategies available for finding people in this database. Flexoline has a Show More Fields button that will expand into what can feel like an overwhelming number of choices. So hopefully we can focus on just the ones that are the most useful for us. One that's not automatically selected is country of birth, all formats. So regardless of whether it's format A, B, or C, you can, that was one of the fields that the National Archives added. You can enter a country in that field and narrow it down. And then the soundex we talked about earlier, that can be really helpful in case the name was typed in the database in a strange way. Keep in mind that some fields will limit results to one format of entry. So if you choose to use a field that's marked in parentheses with format B, that you're only going to return entries in format B. And we've got to be aware that we don't know whether it's format A, B, or C that we're looking for. We've got to try searches that encompass all of those to ensure that we did a thorough search. One of my favorite fields is the county of registration because we can narrow down so quickly, but that is only format A entries. So if we can't find someone by name or narrow it down enough, it's worth trying the county as long as we remember there are format B and C entries to search as well. We are going to hit dead ends. What do we do then? Well, the data we're searching for might be incomplete or unretrievable just within this database. I ended up getting help with Johann Robert Gidland, who we introduced at the beginning, and emailed the electronic records archivists who searched for me. You'll notice on the right, that first pink box, that his surname was entered in the database as simply G, with a bunch of illegible characters afterwards. And there's no way I would be able to find a John G, who is my John G and only my John G. It turns out that he had a format B or C entry and had an exact date of birth. So if I had tried searching his exact date of birth, I might have found him. You'll notice that his country of birth is blank for format B, and country of birth for format A and C is C3 blank, and that didn't get translated to anything. So there was no way to find him by searching for Swedes. If we go down to the left, it did have his month, day, and year of entry into the United States. So that's another way to search this database. If you already have a passenger arrival, you can try to find it by the date of entry. And lastly, that soundex code down there, I wanted to illustrate how useful that can be. Even though the database didn't capture his surname correctly, it does have the soundex code. So if I had searched soundex, I might have found him. These suggestions get pretty specific. So even if you remembered nothing else except what we just talked about, all that to say, don't worry too much about this slide, but I wanted to include these details in case they were relevant for you. When the archivists receive your request, they're going to use the A number to find the name of the digital file. And the way they do that is using what they call a crosswalk. And they're looking up an A number on the crosswalk to get the AR2 number that's on a PDF file. If you happen to find an A number from another record, and they are out there, you can ask the electronic record staff to search their crosswalk in addition to flexoline. So if you're not finding your person in flexoline and you have an alien registration number or an A number, you can still ask the archivists to search. And finally, there are simply some individuals that won't be found. NARA found that about 1 million alien registrations are not represented in flexoline. When the USCIS master index is transferred to the National Archives, then those forms will be findable. But right now, the master index hasn't been transferred due to privacy concerns. And from what I read, that could happen in the future for it to be transferred to the National Archives, and that will be very exciting when it does. Okay, so hopefully we've gotten over that first bump with the database so that we feel good about going to the website, which is linked in the handout, and starting to search. Let's take a look at a few cases where an alien registration would be relevant. So we're coming back to Johann Robert Gidland, my favorite great-grandfather for this presentation. And I've got his 1940 census entry here at the top. He's living in King County, Washington, in Seattle, which is one of the port cities that he sailed in and out of. He's only Robert Gidland in Washington, and his second wife, Sylvia, is there in his household. And as we have grown accustomed to, we look all the way over to the right at column 16. It's all the way over to the right in my presentation, but it's about halfway across the page on the actual census. And the enumerator has written in an A for naturalized there for both Robert and Sylvia. Now, I have reason to suspect that Johann Robert never became a citizen. So I raise my eyebrows at that and I question where that information came from. The 1940 census is interesting because it marks who gave the information to the enumerator. So someone knocked on the door and talked to Sylvia and might have asked, "Are you and your husband citizens?" And for some reason or another, maybe she thought they were naturalized. Maybe she didn't know, or maybe she said that they were in order to save face. Ultimately can't know, but I did not take this record at face value. So it's important to remember that the census is just a clue. There's no actual correlation between the census and who registered in this alien registration process, who actually filled out the forms. So Sylvia may have thought they were naturalized citizens, but surprise, I found her in the flexoline database, meaning that she completed an alien registration. And well, as I described to you earlier, the archivist found Johann Robert for me. Here's his alien registration form that they sent me. It confirms that he lived in King County, Washington. I know I've got the right individual. He wrote that his usual occupation is carpenter and roofing contractor and that he's self-employed, which fits with the picture. He always was a carpenter on the ships that he worked on, but this was new information for me. I didn't know that he tried to have his own roofing business while he was living there in Washington. And here is his statement on his criminal history, question 14. I have not been arrested or indicted for or convicted of any offense or offenses. So it's important to keep in mind that we can't always take the non-citizen statement at face value either. I happen to know that Johann Robert Gidland was all three arrested, indicted, and convicted for crimes in the past. But perhaps he took the chance, living on the other side of the country, thought that was 5 years ago. What does it matter now? I haven't committed any crimes, is what he put on the form. So he chose an omission. Some people may have felt like they needed to give an answer to conform. As we mentioned earlier, we don't know what amount of suspicion they faced in their community. Here's our next example. This is two more of my great-grandparents, Cyril Rivard and Dorilda Rivard, who lived also in Brockton in Plymouth County, Massachusetts, with their son Jean-Jacques and their daughter Janine. We look over to column 16, and Cyril, Dorilda, and Jean-Jacques have all said that they are alien, and Janine is the one who has filed papers in this family. So we're going to look for all four of these people in the alien registrations as well. Here's Cyril Rivard's alien registration form. And what was nice to see on Cyril's is that on his alternate names, he gave what is called his deed name. In French Canada, many people had two surnames that they could use interchangeably or together. And if I didn't know his alternate surname, now I've got it from the AR2 form. He also put his nickname, Charlie Rivard. That one I did not know until I saw this record. And now I've got record sets to go back and look through and make sure I've searched for his nickname. I would not have thought Charlie would be matched with Cyril. I knew from other records that he was an auto mechanic, but what I did not know is that he worked for the B&J Auto Company. And now that's unlocked avenues of research in city directories and maps and possibly even records at the local library. Maybe there's a photo of this business waiting to be discovered, but I would not have known where to look if he hadn't typed this on the alien registration form. The middle image there, question 10, is about memberships or activities in clubs and organizations. He put the Club National of Brockton, Massachusetts. I've never heard of Club National. Now I'm curious. Maybe I'll go look that up in the local newspapers. Maybe there are some surviving archival records of that organization that again would not have known to look through had it not been listed here. Cyril, in contrast to Johann Robert, was honest about his criminal history and stated that he was convicted of drunken driving 11 years past in a nearby town, that he lost his driver's license and was fined $100. That's quite a lot of money back then. And yet again, another clue for looking for further records. Maybe there are criminal records for this location and time period. I won't know until I look. I might find more details about my ancestor. Okay, a new example here. Gustav and Ida Pearson are living in York County, Maine, in the town of Kittery. Ida is the one who gave the information to the enumerator. You can see the circled X there. And there appears to be a little discrepancy on how to spell Gustav's name. It looks like they've crossed off the E and crossed out the name August. Looking over to the right-hand side, they are both listed as alien. Their children, Nelson and Ruth, were born in Maine, so they're probably U.S. citizens. We're going to search for Gustav and Ida. And here are the hits that we get in the flexoline database. We've got 6 results for a Gustav Pearson. That was just a simple name search, but I'm very interested in the first one because it's state of Maine. But what's going on with the county there? He was counted in the census in York County. This registration was in Somerset. So I'm interested in that record, but I need to find out what's in it in order to make sure it's the right person. And searching for Ida Pearson, we found her just where we expected in York County, Maine. When the record that I ordered came back, we found that Gustav Pearson was living at the Central Maine Sanatorium when he registered. He usually worked as a bricklayer, but he had become a tuberculosis invalid. And so just in the span of a few months, from April when the census was taken to September when he filed this registration, he apparently got sick enough to go to the sanatorium 2 counties away. And it specifies that he was a member of the Bricklayers Union, yet another organization that I could try to research the history and maybe even their archival records surviving to research in. And he said that he has applied for citizenship papers, but it was so long ago, I don't know when and what the number on the paper was. I just know it was in Boston, is what he typed up. But he guessed 1910, and I at least have a location that I could, if I wanted to, go start looking for that declaration of intention to become a citizen. Okay, so we've talked through some examples of who to look for in alien registrations, and we've found 3 men that we were looking for. And now I'll talk a little bit about what happened to their wives. And this isn't necessarily always a man and woman bifurcation here. It just happens to be 3 examples where the women aren't found in the regular alien registration record set. So you'll remember that most of the paper copies of alien registrations were destroyed after being microfilmed. Some were not. The INS was, let's say, innovating with its record keeping during this time period and switched between several systems of consolidating files and ultimately settled on the A file or the alien case file as the primary vehicle for all the records about one individual. So some registration forms were moved to an alien case file, which the INS started creating those A files for immigrants who arrived or naturalized, if they were already here, after 1944. So typically, the alien registration forms were consolidated into the A file before they were microfilmed and destroyed. As a rule of thumb, I always search the NARA catalog, the National Archives catalog, for the A number that I find in flexoline, just in case there's an alien case file to be found. Those are all cataloged. I shouldn't say all. Individuals who were born more than 100 years ago are cataloged by their alien registration number and by their name. So if you have an individual with a common name, you can use flexoline to find their A number, and then you can search the catalog with the A number to zero in on the alien case file that you're looking for, if there is one. How do we find these A files otherwise? One thing you can do is check the 1950 census, when these individuals, if they were still living, were recording their citizenship status again. The dates here are going to start to feel a little technical, so don't worry so much about following the dates so much as just knowing that alien case files are there and there are strategies we can use to search for them. There's a certain time period from 1940 to 1956 where they have a chance of having an A file. After March 31st, 1956, if they were naturalizing after that point, they definitely have an A file that you want to look for. As I said earlier, you can search the National Archives catalog by name or by A number, and those files are all kept at 2 different National Archives branches. You can order reproductions by email. The last place where alien registrations might be hiding has to do with that file keeping innovation sequence that INS went through. After they were created, some A files were consolidated into what are called C files, that's C for certificate or certificate of naturalization. And those C files are still at USCIS and have to be requested through the genealogy program. And C files are typically relevant for people who naturalized between 1944 and 1956. At that naturalization event is when INS would have taken all the records that they have on that person and put them into the C file that's referenced by a different number that is not the A number. And that's the message, the main message I wanted to get across about C files today is that we've been working with the A number, and that works for alien registrations. It works for alien case files, but it does not work with C files. And you can either see the handout for more information about C files in the genealogy program, or you can always send me an email and I would be happy to help you sort out which record to request when I'm helping people plan their next steps. I like to correspond and just get you where you need to go. So here I showed my catalog search that I did for Ida Pearson, and that's how I found all of these lovely things on the right-hand side. You can see that alien registration form on the right is the original paper that they scanned for me at the National Archives in Kansas City, as opposed to getting a microfilm copy that may or may not be blurry. And I searched by that A number, is that top highlight there. What about Sylvia Gidland? Here's an excerpt from her alien case file. Her alien registration form was under the name Solveig Gidland, Solveig Kilberg Gidland. And she is alternatively known as Mrs. Robert and lived in King County, Washington. So we know we've got the right Sylvia. Here are some other documents found in her alien case file. And once again, this was the consolidation of everything that the government had on Solveig or Sylvia Gidland into one file that is now accessible through the National Archives. On the top left, she's got an immigrant identification card from when she originally came to the US. She had to go abroad and get an immigrant visa, applying as Johann Robert's wife, and brought their youngest child with her on that trip. I found in passenger records, and took this photo in 1938. On the lower left, here's her naturalization photo that was taken much later. I believe that was 1956. That's right. So nearly 20 years later, I've gotten 2 photographs of this individual. On the right, a birth certificate that she brought to the consulate to get her visa. On the bottom, a list of all her previous addresses for 5 years and her employers. And then stamped on the back of her naturalization certificate is the court order for her name change, connecting those two names, Solveig and Sylvia. So you can see how rich the alien case files are. The alien registrations are great enough by themselves, but every once in a while, you might find that your individual has even more to be found. What about Dorilda Rivard? And I wanted to show Dorilda because it's an example of a consolidated C file that had to come from the genealogy program at USCIS. And this is the best copy available, but it's also black and white. Oh well. But you can see there the address matching the 1940 census on item number 2. And similar to Sylvia's A file, we've got several photographs of her at different points in her life. She had a border crossing ID card to be able to go back to Canada and visit her family. And I put in the pink box there, this is just a little artifact from the INS's file keeping practices, that the entire A file under that A number that might be found in flexoline has been consolidated in file C7316170. That's the C file number that governs this record and not the A number. Okay, so we made it through all of our people, and now I'd be happy to take your questions and comments. And if you feel like multitasking, you can click on the link in the handout and get started searching.
The first one is the 1918 registration in the database?
As far as I know, those are not in flexoline. It's focused on the World War II era. I have seen National Archives catalog entries for alien registrations from that time period. So it's worth searching the catalog for the location that you're interested in and include 1918 alien registration just to see if something's there. You can also email an archivist who's at the branch that close to the location where you're searching for the individual, and they could help narrow down whether those records still exist.
The next person was asking, if searching is dependent on the census, how do we search for persons born prior to 1920 but who immigrated after 1940, specifically like 1952?
Let me see where I want to go with that first. That person will not be in flexoline. They probably they definitely had an A number assigned, and they probably have an A file. If they were born before 1920, it could be at the National Archives. So you could try searching for that person's name, and depending on the A number and when they naturalized, you might need to make a FOIA request to USCIS. And this is where it gets technical. Like I said at the end, you may have to review the information on the USCIS Genealogy Program webpage. And then if you have questions, I'd be happy to converse about your specific situation by email.
Actually, I had just put your email in the chat, which is a good segue to, if anybody would like a copy of the chat, send us an email. Our email is genealogy@acpl.info, which I did put in the chat. And I'll probably do it a couple more times before we're done, but I just wanted to make that announcement really quick. Okay. See any more questions in the Q&A box, but I do want to say that the person who's doing the happy dance, I just scrolled back up in the chat. She's been looking for 30 years. And just now, during this presentation, found him, her guy, on flexoline. So these are the stories we like to hear.
That's awesome. Yeah, and if you get a good result and you're happy about it, I'd love to hear about it.
I didn't see any more questions, but a lot of people, were thanking you for your amazing presentation, saying that there's just so much fantastic information. It's all really helpful. So thank you again, Ryan, for speaking for us.
Great, and thank you all for the opportunity. Best wishes for your searches.